And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. In British Columbia, there are 27 regional districts that provide local, sub-regional, and regional services. They are responsible for planning, providing services, and acting as a political forum for local government policy. On today's Open Connection, we return to the archives to bring you part 2 of Carving the Future.
The Kitimat-Stikine Regional District will also still deal with Nisga'a lands as it does other communities.
They'll be doing everything as usual. They will have a representative from electoral area A, who right now is Harry Nice, and they will be able to elect that individual. The non-Aboriginals within that, the Nisga'a Nation, will also be able to vote on that, their representative.
The Nisga'a government will have the ability to make laws and reach agreements with the federal and provincial governments covering a wide range of issues and services, such things as Nisga'a citizenship, language and culture, public order, employment, child custody, social and health services, and education. However, many federal and provincial laws also apply to Nisga'a citizens and lands. For the administration of justice, the Nisga'a can set up their own court, and its judges must comply with principles of independence and impartiality and fairness. Nisga'a court decisions can also be appealed, and the accused in some cases could ask to be tried in provincial court instead. The treaty also provides for the Nisga'a setting up their own police force in the future.
We will not create our own justice system and police force, on day one of the treaty. It won't happen that way. Our view is it will be phased in over a period of years.
Much of this agreement focuses on economic issues, but culture is a major incentive for the Nisga'a in seeking this deal. Economic self-sufficiency and self-government will give the Nisga'a greater ability to preserve and promote their ancient culture. Through education, there's already Nisga'a language being taught, and through the treaty, the Nisga'a will take possession again of artifacts, like these repatriated from the church, that were taken from the valley in the past. There's a long list of items, including masks, tools, and jewelry, that will be returned from the Provincial Museum in Victoria and the National Museum of Civilization in Hull, Quebec. So how final will this treaty be if it's ratified? Negotiators have taken a new approach to that question. The treaty says it exhaustively sets out Nisga'a rights, and any other rights that may have been left out are released by the Nisga'a. However, the deal does make provisions for some amendments.
We have to keep in mind nothing in the world is perfect, and I certainly don't expect, some sort of sections of our treaty to work perfectly into the future. If there needs to be fine-tuning done, then I think that's what we're looking at. If we need changes, certainly it must be brought before our people by a vote on whatever change may be required. Certainly the government of British Columbia and the government of Canada must also agree. So all three parties must agree to any changes that may happen. So one box at the change, it won't happen.
There's a lot of hope for the future here. Many Nisga'a say this treaty holds the promise of economic opportunity, a chance for them to create badly needed jobs for their people.
It might be a banner year for us. We also send what we call a Super B of supplies, building supplies to Greenville alone. We didn't even have to lift a finger for that, so good for us. We also supply Gitwin-Sit with renovation material. We haven't as yet supplied them with building material, new construction material.
There are currently 11 houses under construction in UINT, a much busier year than last.
I see this business picking up even more, housing-wise, new construction, new small businesses, hopefully a new band office.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. He found his true home in Terrace after purchasing the Telecom Twin Theaters in 1967. In 1984, he purchased the Bill Noor Telecom Lodge, which operated as a lodging facility primarily serving workers and tourists at the former Nass Valley Camp. Let us return to the archives as Nass Camp owner Bill Young shares his thoughts on the Nisga'a Treaty.
I tell you, this thing today has just opened up this valley. And so many people are coming here to see the beautiful place it is. We're going to get tourists. Our logging is depleted. We've got no logging as economy here. And I think tourism is going to be the answer to the success of this valley.
And tourism is already picking up. The Lava Bed Park was created back in 1992. And while it's drawing many visitors to the area, attracting and sustaining development is something the Nisga'a haven't had a lot of experience with yet.
What occurred today, I think, is the beginning of a process that enables our people to do certain things. We've never had the ability to do that before. They were denied the Aboriginal people, not only in British Columbia, but right across the country. Well, we've been given a chance to see what we can do. And I'm confident in when I look out there and see the faces of our people who have gone through the learning institutions, going to college and university, training schools. I'm very confident that they will rise to the occasion. They'll rise to the challenge.
Many young people from the valley are away in college and university, and while some have chosen to make the bigger cities home, that's not a concern for elders here in the valley.
We taught them to be unique, and we taught them wherever they can get security for themselves and their families, stay there. Until such time, after 5 years, there will be development, economic developments will happen here. And we also encourage the young people that are now going to school to get into these fields of endeavor, like professional foresters, oceanographers, fishery technicians, you name it, school teachers, to stay in there and go right through the whole process and then come back qualified to assume the many jobs that this agreement will bring.
Many business people believe the Nisga'a Treaty will also benefit non-Nisga'a by providing certainty for investors, generating new economic activity, and bringing new money to the Northwest.
The Nisga'a realize that there are some commercial ventures that will survive up there, but to a large part, they're still going to have to do business in more major urban areas, and that'll be good for us here. And I think there are lots of opportunities for joint venturing with them.
What I see coming forward is a number of joint ventures that our businesses can get into with the Nisga'a to promote various things. I see just excellent opportunities in the area of tourism, where people from out of country would spend a few days in Terrace and then move on and spend a few days in the Nisga'a core lands. And I think that bodes well for all of us. I see opportunities in the forest industry too, because the timing for that is right. As far as I'm concerned, our forest industry is in somewhat disarray right now. So it's time to take a new look at this.
But Telstra admits there is a flip side to this potentially rosy picture. A number of forestry workers are going to be displaced, he says, and there will be job losses.
There is TFL that's switching over in the Nisga'a core lands. I'm not sure of the exact figure, but it's probably an annual cut of 200,000 meters. They will have access to some forestry base outside of their core lands. I believe it's another 150,000 cubic meters annual cut. So there is going to be some shifting from what went on before to them. But let's be honest here, they have an unemployment rate of about 80%. There are a lot of good people there that are willing and ready to go to work. Some need training, but they're willing to do that as well, who've been sitting on their hands there, and that can't last forever. That's not a good situation either. And so there will be some shifting, and we do have to get used to that. and we will have to look for other opportunities, maybe value-added opportunities, and we can do that.
Provincial and federal governments also feel the treaty will benefit non-Nisga'a and predict the effects could reach well beyond the Northwest.
From my view, we're not talking about costs here, we're talking about investments. And indeed, the federal government is a willing participant in settling land claim issues and building self-governments and making the investments that are necessary that will not only benefit the First Nations that we come to agreements with, but I believe all of the people of British Columbia.
Financially, it's the only onload that BC is ever going to see from Ottawa. That is going to be about $500 million a year into the provincial economy, particularly the natural resource and rural areas of British Columbia that are going to benefit. So it's going to be not only the right thing to do to sign this treaty and other treaties, but it's going to be financially beneficial for all of us.
Not everyone is embracing the treaty. There are some who have serious doubts. Among the skeptics, Skeena MP Mike Scott.
It's going to result, in my view, in very limited economic opportunities and prosperity for individual Nisga'a people. The barriers to self-sufficiency and the very things that have been holding the individual Nisga'a people back from succeeding are not removed by this agreement. For example, there's no right to private property. And I'm talking about private property from an individual point of view. Everything is to be conveyed to the control and ownership of the Nisga'a central government.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Found on the BC Treaty Commission's website, the First Nation Works Plan template outlines the work a First Nation will engage over the year, including negotiation topics, community engagement, addressing overlaps, shared territories, land selection, and technical work, to name a few. Let us return to the archives as Neil Sterrett weighs in on the templates.
If anyone wants to sign a treaty, it's only going to be the Nisga'a model. I don't think from the Premier's point of view there's going to be any other model, and from that point of view I can see why the Premier of the province put all his big guns on this and went for it, because he knew he was going to get a deal that was going to push Delgamuukw back. And I think from that perspective the Nisga'a should have been more vigilant. I think that they should have recognized what they were doing to other tribal groups in BC. They themselves have said this is a template, and if that's the case, then other tribal groups and other provincial leaders should have been involved on those levels that affected other people.
The Gitnyaw are already in court over the Nisga'a Treaty. They're charging the government with negotiating in bad faith. A mediation process is going to occur, but the Gitnyaw are very worried about the impact it's going to have on their future treaty.
I mean, there's the whole question of the certainty language, which we understand is consistent with the policy of the extinguishment and surrender. I think that we're quite concerned about that. The other matter is the 92 lands, all the 91-24 lands will now be abandoned. That's a big concern to us. Certainly, that will certainly have some impact at our table. That's the second item. And the whole method of the common bowl approach, I think, is a big concern to us. We have a system based on the hereditary system, the house-based system, but the common bowl approach is something that may have some impact with us.
The Tsimshian have an agreement with the Nisga'a regarding their hereditary lands, but they don't view the Nisga'a Treaty as a template.
They're geographically so different from the Tsimshian. We're spread out from Terrace in and around Prince Rupert and almost down to Bella Bella on the central coast of British Columbia with our 7 member communities. And so there's no way that we're going to get one common parcel of land that would be Tsimshian treaty lands, for example.
Since the final treaty was announced, there have been calls for referendums and even a call for a provincial election over the issue. With 51 other First Nation groups at the bargaining table, it seems Premier Clark has a lot of work ahead if he's serious about using the Nisga'a Treaty as a template.
This is definitely not a done deal. Mr. Clark can say whatever he wants, and he can run around patting himself on the back, and Mr. Harry Nice can pat Mr. Dan Miller on the back and and all that kind of stuff, but it's not a done deal. I don't care.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
During an oral questioning period of the 36th Parliament, MP Mike Scott stated if the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development knew the Gitniao and Gitxsan band in northern BC had claimed essentially the same territory that the Nisga'a were receiving under the treaty. In this final segment of the special Part 2 episode of Open Connection, let us return the archives as MP Scott shares his concerns on the Nisga'a Treaty.
That we're going to see legal challenges sooner rather than later that are going to maybe result in the provincial government having no option but to provide a referendum.
Since August 4th, there's been calls for political resignations, calls for referendums, and threats of continuing court action. The Gitniao, the Gitxsan, and 2 hereditary chiefs from Kincolith have already launched separate court actions opposing the Nisga'a land claims deal. The chiefs say the treaty was negotiated behind closed doors without enough input from those living on the lands. Meanwhile, the Gitniao and Gitxsan feel they've been robbed of their traditional territory.
In this situation, what we're talking about is the Nisga'a claim in the entire Nass watershed, from tidewater to the headwaters. And that is not an overlap. That's, in fact, an act of aggression because the Gitxsan and the Gitniao are on the upper 2/3.
But the Nisga'a say that they've tried to make concessions with their neighbors and that they've indeed made provisions in the treaty to accommodate some of the fears the Gitniao and Gitxsan have about land accessibility.
The 3 parties have again agreed on certain changes that will address the concerns that our neighbors had. So there is now an agreed on process on how to deal with possible disputes that may linger in the future.
On the day the treaty was announced, the Premier invited the Gitniao to negotiate their own treaty, including the overlapping lands already agreed upon with the Nisga'a.
If there is any agreement that with the Gitniao, which impacts on land for the Nisga'a, then the Nisga'a people get compensated and made whole for that. And I think that contemplates the notion that there could be some changes, although I certainly wouldn't particularly support that.
Regardless, the Gitniao and Gitxsan aren't convinced that the issue has been settled, but heading to court may no longer be a viable option.
They have the treaty, they have the rights under the treaty, and they have the money to defend themselves. We don't have the money to go and take them on that level. So I don't have high hopes about this being resolved once the treaty is signed. I don't have any trouble with the treaty being signed at this time, but those overlap areas should be withdrawn. They should not be in until such time as this has been resolved by a third party.
The Gitxsan and the Gitniao aren't the only First Nations bordering the land in question. The Tsimshian also have overlapping territory with the Nisga'a. However, the 2 bands have set up a boundary at Gaynor Lake and a common area around the Lower Nass. It's a case of friendly negotiating rather than legal jousting, and so far the Tsimshian say it's been an agreeable arrangement.
Since that time, you've been aware that the Nisga'a have been getting closer and closer to this final agreement. We've been involved with our treaty negotiations, so we haven't taken too much more than that very basic step, but we keep in touch. We've got to stand up tall together and look after our lands and our resources.
Land and resources aren't the only issues in question. There's the cost of the Nisga'a Treaty, an estimated $459 million, which ultimately will come from the pockets of taxpayers.
And the costs of that whole process are a little bit scary for people, especially if you start thinking about translating that 60 times around the province.
I do believe that the rest of Canada has now started to pay attention to what these Aboriginal claims in British Columbia are all about and what kind of impact or ramifications it might have for the rest of the country. So I do anticipate that there's going to be considerably more debate and considerably more spirited debate in the House of Commons on this legislation than there has been, for example, with Nunavut or with the Satu-Dene-Métis Agreement or the Yukon Land Claims Agreement, which are all north of 60.
Indeed, the entire country has some stake in the Nisga'a deal, if only through their tax dollars. However, British Columbians have a much stronger vested interest, simply because it's BC land which is being negotiated.
I believe it's critical with a treaty that's this important for all British Columbians to have a right to know what is in the treaty and what it will cost.
And a lot of that treaty is good, but there's a lot of it that's bad. And it should be straightened out, and it should go to the people. There definitely should be a referendum. There shouldn't. If this treaty is not good enough to put to the people, then it's not good enough to fly.
But as with most points in what the Premier himself calls a very complex treaty, there's a reaction and an opposite reaction. The negotiating parties are adamant that there will be no referendum.
How many $1 billion were spent on the East Coast? Was there a referendum held on that deal?
We are taking away from the courts and negotiating something with respect and dignity for all three partners here and agreeing to it. And it would be morally wrong to subject that to a referendum. And frankly, it would also be a great betrayal of the process that we've embarked in.
Clark is confident that the legislation will pass as is and says the treaty will be introduced in Victoria this fall or early next spring. But regardless of the legal challenges, regardless of the politics involved in Victoria or in Ottawa, it's the Nisga'a themselves who must first judge the treaty.
We're going to have to go back to all of our 4 communities and 3 outlying locals over a 90-day period to inform them of the contents of the agreement, to make sure that everyone is aware of the contents.
The ratification process began months ago with a massive campaign to make a Nisga'a voter list. An enrollment committee has applications from as far away as Holland with the names of those claiming to be of Nisga'a heritage.
Don't know how many of our people have moved years ago and they've expanded elsewhere. We don't know. We're going to be interesting to see just how many people are out there that have Nisga'a in them.
Once the people have been registered and had a chance to digest the meat of the treaty, there'll be a vote. Ballot boxes are going to be set up in the Nass as well as in various centers across the province.
The decision will be left entirely to every member of our nation that is of voting age. If you stay away, it would be registered as a no vote. So it's not like voting procedures that apply today in British Columbia, where a small majority elects governments in power. In this process, we're saying 50% plus 1 of all eligible voters.
There are those who aren't thrilled with the document itself.
I'm not satisfied, and I don't believe that we received a just settlement.
Morton says as a hereditary chief, he owns land on the Pt2 River, which isn't included in the treaty, but he's dissatisfied for other reasons.
If you divide up the $400 and so million you say we're going to receive, you divide it up by 6,000, it doesn't come to too much.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but that connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.